Well, I think the Royal College of Surgeons came to me with a very open mind about what an artist could bring to the subject of a memorial about COVID-19. The kind of mood we wanted was a celebration of the resilience and compassion of healthcare workers. Once I started meeting NHS workers and hearing stories and testimonies about the struggles they went through, that was quite leveled me out, because I thought, well, this job's a job, but it's not what they're doing. It's really, I was in awe of them, if I'm honest. I think I was, the way they walked into the fire.
I think we all felt there was a degree of fear about what it was going to mean for us on a personal basis, as well as how it was going to impact on the services we could give to patients.
And I still remember walking into that room, just saying, this is what we've got to do, and not knowing how that was going to turn out.
We all experienced this feeling of dread, yet another day going to intensive care unit.
But you have to put your fear and your anxiety to one side and just really get on with looking after the patients as best you could.
At the end of the day, if we're not there to do something for the good, then we might as well not call ourselves doctors or nurses.
It was a kind of putting yourself in harm's way. And that's something, as a society, we should be aware of and remember. And that's kind of why I'm so into this project, is that we don't forget that's what they did, put themselves in harm's way.
What happened during the course of the pandemic was horrific. We saw many healthcare workers contracting COVID and many succumbing and dying. They were compassionate, they were absolutely committed to looking after everybody who was suffering. And yet they contracted COVID because, of course, hospitals were where COVID was the most prevalent, and some of them became very ill, and some of them died in the very hospitals that they were working. It was really the thoughts of how to commemorate those selfless individuals who gave their lives to look after others during this time.
For me, clay is the best part for not just kind of because most of the creative act is taking place in the clay stage, but because of that direct relationship with the hand and brain and material. I became interested in art as a schoolboy, and I remember it was clay that got me involved in the subject. I basically picked up a piece of clay, started to manipulate it, was drawn to making a figure, a representational figure. And by the time the class had finished, I had no track of time, I had no sense of time. And it really made sense to me that this was something that I connected with.
That feeling of isolation was worsened during the height of the pandemic for healthcare workers, because when they went home, they often went to places where their family was not with them.
You weren't allowed to see your family or your friends. The only people you saw were the people you were working with, and that shared experience will always be carried forward.
Every sculpture I make begins with an armature, a welded steel armature which bears the weight of the clay. Once I have the basic structure, language, pose, if you like, established in the armature, and then add the clay and build up form and mass and volume. You start off with an armature and a bag of clay, and literally you could do anything with it. So all the big decisions are made with the clay. I think that's the most creative part of the process. The moment I'm depicting in this memorial is for NHS staff leaving work or finishing a shift, and they're taking off their masks, they're taking off their protective gloves and protective eyewear, and essentially to reveal their humanity again. It's coming back into play, because that was one of the things that was very much a feature of COVID-19 care, was that people were so heavily covered in PPE that the patients couldn't really get a sense of who they are, their eyes, and we rely so much on looking at somebody. So I was very aware that I didn't want to make these kind of like medical nights, all covered in PPE. I wanted this stuff to be coming off, and this sense of decompression, and also the sense of their humanity coming through.
If you actually have to wear all this protective equipment, how uncomfortable it was to actually work in theatres, on intensive care units, on wards, wearing all of this, the masks, the visors, you're in this kit for up to 12 hours at a time. You were having marks on your face, people were getting skin rashes. It was very physically uncomfortable to actually work in all of that equipment. But you're quite correct in saying that when you have all of that up, it's a barrier to communication, because normally you don't have masks when you speak to people. It was a very abnormal sort of relationship that you had in terms of your communication with patients.
A first mould is taken, and that is a flexible rubber mould. You'll see that's a pink rubber that gets put on with a catalyst in it, goes on liquid, and solidifies. Once a sufficient amount of rubber is built up, and then a hard jacket is put on top of that in sections. So typically a human figure would probably have about 6 sections. Every iteration, every material stage affords you new opportunities to see, as you say, see it again fresh. You might even just be the fact it's in a different room with a different light, and you change the material again, reveals something about it that you couldn't see in that material. Once I've cast it in resin, I start to sculpt. I'm really removing material, and that's rather than adding, because clay is very much an adding thing. Although you are taking away clay, it's more kind of organic and fluid and liquid-like. Whereas with the resin, you're just sort of sanding, pulverizing it into dust, sharpening it up. So once the second rubber mould is made from the resin, wax is painted into that mould in layer after layer to build a sufficient thickness which will be replicated in bronze at a later stage. The wax pieces are then pulled out of that mould and invested in grog along with a runner and riser system.
I was told by my young trainees, Professor, why do you want to come into the intensive care unit? You can stay back and we will go. And I said, I'm going to be there with you. I'll have the same protection. I'll have the same fear. Let's do it.
We acknowledged the team, and that was that we didn't use a single figure. We wanted to create a group of figures which could obviously underline the collective effort in fighting COVID and caring for patients. But the group also allows you the nuances of those different emotions I was talking about, about the exhaustion, about camaraderie, duty, frustration, all those different things, in some ways, each of the figures kind of maybe steers you towards a particular reading like that.
I think that we've asked so much of people in the health service, and I think there is just this great fatigue that they have no more to give.
It was a more sort of chronic stress that was worse as time went by, rather than the sort of acute stress, if you like. There's been increasing people, leaving, perhaps taking early retirement or leaving to move to other professions because they find the stresses of such a major pandemic and crisis to be really difficult to deal with. So that has also, added to the problems and the challenges of trying to move on and get back to the normal level of service, if you like, after the pandemic.
The resource now is smaller. People are just now saying, we can't do it. And of course that has a massive impact on the users of this health service, which are our patients who are waiting and suffering often with their conditions, and that generates frustration from them, which again negatively impacts on our working lives. So I think it's we're in a difficult situation at the moment.
And burnout is not only in the end of a career. Sometimes young doctors, young nurses may feel under pressure. And as a society, as healthcare organizations, we have to take care of these people because they have a lot to give.
Staff recruitment to the NHS is at an all-time low. Retention's at an all-time low. I think the effects on staff have been great, but there's this pressure now for the willingness to be cut and the service to resume and in fact to work at a greater level than normal to deal with the backlog, but that capacity is not yet there. You mentioned also about the importance of a memorial because the rainbows have gone and the clapping has gone, and I think that is true. People are moving forward, they want to get back to normal, and quite naturally people want the health service to get back to normal and provide exactly the same level of service that it did before, but that's not possible.
think the NHS is a key institution in British culture, not just for the individual when they're sick, or for their families when their loved ones are in a bad place. I think as an institution, it represents the collective. And in a time in history when we're incredibly atomised and individualistic in how we live our lives and how we organise our lives, this idea of the collective is of vital importance to the national identity. There's nothing more unifying than the NHS, more than the idea of nationhood or royalty or anything like that. The NHS is for everybody and everybody counts. In all my life as an artist, I've never taken on a 4-figure group, you know. It's one thing to make a single figure, but then to make 4, you have to make them communicate effectively with each other. So I'm thinking about not just the narrative of what the subject is, fighting COVID and the response of the healthcare service. I'm also thinking about the formal aspects of the figures themselves. So I'm thinking the shape they occupy, I'm thinking about the space they occupy, I'm thinking about the dynamic, you know, the edge, weight, gravity, volume, surface, how light affects it. So I'm thinking about them as formal pieces of sculpture as well, because I believe that the more considered the sculpture, the more you can hold the viewer. You know, if you produce a good piece of sculpture, on one level, people will engage with it and they'll spend more time with it, maybe considering the subject.
The effects of COVID is going to last for a lifetime. And I actually suspect that even at this stage, we don't really truly understand the impact that this pandemic will have had on our society. And I think we're only starting to see the very beginning of that.
You know, the title of the piece is called Your Next Breath, and that's about the sense that although these people were exceptional, we were all implied in this, every single one of us. COVID-19 really did cut across everything. You know, it really affected us in so many different ways, and we're still working that out now. It's going to keep. I think we don't understand fully what impact it's had on our society, our culture, our economy, our sense of ourselves. I think it has a universal message.
You mentioned at the beginning there about, is there a need for a memorial? And I really think there is. And I think it's human nature to want to try and put it behind us and not think about it, and to look forward and to move on. And I think that's important, and that's people's coping mechanism. But having said that, it's also really important to have the opportunity to stop, look back and reflect at what has been.
Because people will have strong memories, but they maybe just go a bit latent, you know, and because people want to be able to move on.